An honor to be on your show. I've been a fan for a while.
Oh, thank you, man. That's awesome to hear. I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to talking to you. I love doing these, shout outs where I just say on Twitter, who wants to jump on a pod sometime. And it's always so great to just connect with people that, aren't as well known and aren't on the podcast circuit, but there's so many awesome Bitcoiners out there. And, I love hearing about everyone's stories and what people are up to. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the plebcasts, they're my favorite because I love
Oh,
just seeing,
really?
yeah, just all of those random stories. That like you said, it's people that aren't popular and they're not on the circuit. Those are a lot of the people I relate to. And throughout my journey, it's been like you just wonder like if I'm going through this, there has to be, so many others going through it at the same time. And I'm so curious to find out about that. And so that's why I think your show has been so great. Like focusing on that and also focusing just on like the transformations that happen with people when they encounter Bitcoin and kind of what happens there, which is really one of the most amazing things and the thing that's most relatable for me and my story, kind of getting to where I am here.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely break into that. But,
Yeah.
I agree with that. One, just because, most people, if you're on the podcast circuit, like you've probably heard those same people a few times on different podcasts, right? So there's less mysterious, like, more about their background and their kind of shtick. And maybe that's the reason why, the plebcasts are kind of novel or interesting because they're novel. People haven't heard from these people before. But what I'm finding, and it, sounds like what you found and increasingly like many others, is that it's so interesting to hear from people in all different parts of the world that are kind of converging on a similar perspective about what's going on and are, as you said, are experiencing similar changes in their perspective. And as a result of that, changes in their lives and their behavior. And, so often when I do these, like it's still, because I'm so wrapped up in this, I get to speak with Bitcoiners all the time, whether it's on the podcast or at a conference or something. And so like,
Mhm.
it's becoming, I forget that so many Bitcoiners out there are still fairly isolated, like in their lives, right? Like they don't have that many people where they can just completely jam out on Bitcoin and go as far down the rabbit hole as they want to, because those people don't exist in their meat space life, and so they get their rocks off on Twitter or on whatever. But I love being like a participant in the ability for people that don't often get to talk about how like interested and enthusiastic and how meaningful this is to people in their life. Like I love being the person that they get to do that with. So that's been an unintended benefit of doing these sort of plebcast things.
Yeah, yeah, so cool. And I'm glad you mentioned kind of the isolation because in the public's Bitcoin sphere, whatever, we hear people talking about, the connection, how deep of a connection we all have and the sense of brotherhood and all of that. But, for a lot of people, for most people on their journey, they're alone for most of it and for the hardest part in the beginning. And
Mm.
maybe their whole world around them is actually maybe resisting that journey and that transformation. And so, yeah, it's an important thing. I love it. And there's 100 different ways we can also, bolster up the plebs and just make this culture really happen.
Totally. And I think the good thing is that if either because they were like this before and Bitcoin has emboldened them, or, they were especially kind of transformed by the whole Bitcoin phenomenon. But, like Bitcoiners seem to me to be well positioned to take the isolation and the heat, right? Like they're the ones that are going to kind of plant their flag, and it doesn't matter if they lose friends or family over it. Like they're gonna represent what they think is the most truthful and the most meaningful, one of the most truthful and meaningful things going on, and that's been so beneficial in their life. And so they're not going to back down from that. But of course, like, my opinion is that I can't really think of, it may be the case that relationships are the most meaningful thing that one can accumulate in life, right? Stacking sats is one thing, but stacking honest, sincere, meaningful relationships is maybe the only thing that's more valuable than stacking sats. And to the extent that being isolated still kind of precludes that to a certain degree, or at least is an impediment to it. I again, I just love that I get the opportunity to connect with these people all over the world and kind of bring them in. Well, certainly myself establish a relationship with people like yourself, which is amazing, but also get to, showcase all these awesome Bitcoiners that are kind of just lurking in the shadows all over the world and, bring them to light a little bit. I think it's just part of feeding into all of us getting to know one another and getting to assess one another's characters and that kind of thing. And as this thing unfolds.
Totally. Yeah. And I guess you made a good point. It really is those who are probably more fit to go against the grain. They're going to be the ones that come up early. They're going to be the ones that are kind of able to make the journey alone. And that's
it's almost a rite of passage in a sense. It's like if you can't shoulder the burden by yourself, like maybe you haven't earned like entry into the good part, right? It's almost like we all have to go through that hero's journey of being the the black sheep or whatever you want to call it, and going through the criticism and maintaining conviction despite that, and then coming out the other side and realizing, holy shit, there's like tens of thousands of people that are like that as well. And it's such a pleasure to connect with them after you've shouldered that burden or gone through that journey yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just so curious when I was, when I first noticed that Bitcoin was really like changing some of my most core beliefs and changing what I wanted to do in my life, how I saw things, how I was acting. I was just thinking like there has to be, if this is happening to me, there must be like 10,000 other people in similar positions as I, maybe similar age as I, that are going through the same thing. And if that's the case, and I wanted to find out, I wanted to know, because I was like, if that's the case, then that speaks to really how true this is and how potent this is. And just more and more that's been confirmed for me.
Yeah. Have you ever, participated in any meet space Bitcoiner event or anything like that?
No. I'm actually going to very soon in Austin. I'm just about to move to Austin.
Sick.
So that's obviously where a lot of the stuff is happening. But I have lived in Oklahoma City my whole life. And so there was no Bitcoin meetups there for a while. And I've just been here in Utah for about a year, ever since I got my first software job. And of course, now that I moved over here, they have the first Oklahoma Bitcoin conference, which is awesome. I'm glad. But up here and in a lot of places, like I searched, but it was all blockchain and crypto. And I was like, okay, that sounds like more of a punishment than something worth my while.
Exactly. But I've been hearing rumblings about Oklahoma that, of course, a lot of stuff is popping off in Texas and the mining and around Austin and that kind of stuff. And a lot of companies are locating there. But, some people are a little bit, Texas is a little too blue, or at least Austin, that kind of vibes. And I've some people have told me that they're loving the vibes in Oklahoma, especially Tulsa, actually.
Yeah. I mean, Tulsa and Oklahoma City, that's all there really is, unless you want to live off the grid. But Oklahoma, it's a pleb state. There's a few of these states that they've been discounted, and you just haven't had a lot of economic activity, haven't had a lot of things happening for them for a very long time. Oklahoma is right in the middle of that. But now, like, as we kind of believe in this transition, we're going from a more top-down paradigm where it makes sense to have all the economic activity and all the people squished into these small areas. But really, I see it that this is going to distribute and decentralize, really. And Oklahoma, and a lot of people are talking about Nashville, and just like these smaller states that people don't think about, they're going to become very powerful, especially in regards to mining. I mean, obviously the oil and natural gas resources in Oklahoma and Texas and is a pretty big driver for bringing in Bitcoiners. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see it unfold. And I'm probably, once I move to Texas, I'm probably going to stay in that part of the country for the next decade.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, you could probably comment on this, but do you think the fact that Oklahoma has such a large influence of like Native American like reservations and population, do you think that lends itself to a more distributed or Citadel-esque or independent, or like, do you think that influences the culture there much, or what's the dynamic like?
I don't think so. Maybe for the natives that live there, and like they're kind of used to having their own community where they think of themselves, well, they are their own nations, right? They see themselves that way, and they kind of try and bolster up their community in that sense. And so I think in a lot of ways, like natives just in general, they're very attuned to Bitcoin, and it's very useful for them. But yeah, I don't really see that having much of an impact on the culture in Oklahoma, except for just the general, kind of Southern culture where people want to have a piece of land and a big truck and all of that.
Do you think, and I know very little about the regulations and laws around this stuff, but do you think that Bitcoiners at some point will be able to piggyback or integrate into those nations where there's less federal, like, overbearing control in some capacity? Like, I'm assuming those nations are like more autonomous to some degree. Am I right in that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't see why not. Like, if they do start to adopt the Bitcoin standard, it makes sense. It's like, hey, this can benefit us. We don't need any middle third parties. We can take in people straight into our nation or into our communities or whatever they have set up, and they can just get paid directly for it. And so, I could see there being an incentive there that really develops, but tons
Early
of
days.
yeah, so early. People, as much as people in Oklahoma and in the South are probably well attuned for Bitcoin, they're also, by nature of what information they're exposed to, some of the last people to really hear about it. So yeah, like I've, told just about everyone in my life in Oklahoma about Bitcoin, and the only people I've been able to get along on the ride with me is my parents, thank God, and my
Nice.
wife as well. And that took years, years of me telling my parents all of this crazy stuff that I was hearing from Bitcoiners in 2017 and 2018. And then in the 2020s, when all this stuff with COVID started to happen, they really started to come around and started to listen to me. And so now they're saving in sats. I helped them get some auto stacking set up onto a hardware wallet. And so it's just like, such a relief.
That's the best, man. That's so best when, like, it's so great when the penny, not only because they're actually, setting themselves up for a better future, to weather whatever turmoil might be coming, but also just like there's a smaller distance between the two of you, right? Like before, you're just this, you're the crazy kid, and they're like, oh my God, what is our son up to? What is he thinking? Like, and now, like, and those things come together where they start to see the rationale behind what you've been saying and the solution that you've been putting forward. And then, they actually agree to it, at least to some degree, and they participate in it. And, now you can have, even, we were saying earlier, maybe you don't have that many Bitcoiners around you in your meat space life, but man, it's great, whenever you have Sunday dinners or get together with your family, that you can actually, have that conversation a little bit and talk about Bitcoin and talk about what's happening economically. And so, and I'm saying all this because I orange pilled my parents as well.
Mm-hmm.
My dad before my mom, but even my mom now is on board, and it's so great because yeah, you get to connect over something that you think is super important. And, there's few things better than that, connecting with people you love over things that you find most meaningful.
Yeah. And I think if the people, if they really love you, they'll see the fruit, right? If they really love you and there's fruit, they'll see that. And that will be, that'll have you question yourself, like, hey, all this has changed in this person's life. Like maybe there's something to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I think all the time, if someone told me what some of the things that I tell people when I'm, trying to get them interested in Bitcoin, such as that, get off zero. If you're on zero, you're in a dangerous position, or that, the whole global economy is in question. If someone told me those things, I would probably think about it at least a little bit. I would be like, wow, if that's true, that's it's kind of like Pascal's wager. It's like, well, maybe I should put some kind of eggs in that basket. Maybe I should do a little bit of extra research and think about it. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard. People just have so very little interest. But I think
there's such outlandish claims too, or even if they're not even like full on claims, like I think, you know, the proof is in the pudding, which is why it's interesting that you know, these beneficial, I think broadly speaking, beneficial individual or personal changes are occurring in tandem with, you know, the Bitcoin thesis playing out, because it does lend credibility to what you're saying to the people that you're saying it to. Like if you were just some wacko, like, you know, saying crazy shit and, you know, your life was a mess and like, you know, relationships were terrible and health was terrible, and like, you know, you're not if you were not a very credible person and you were saying things that were kind of crazy, then you'd be dismissed very easily. But you know, if you can, even though you're saying things that to some ears are quite outlandish, but if you can do so in a rational and a logical way, and that sort of approach or perspective is represented throughout different areas of your life, and people can see the benefit of your perspective, and then, you know, you quote unquote succeeding, you know, doing well in those different areas of life lends credibility to your assertions in this domain. And I think that helps at least leave the door ajar for people to not dismiss what you might be telling them outright or immediately. You know, you're always going to get people that are just closed off to it. But the more that, yeah, I mean, the more that our life is oriented around the proper things and that we're pursuing them in a proper and productive and efficient and successful way, I think that lends credibility to you know, the Bitcoin pitches that we might be making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like what you're describing, that's the trope or the straw man that people make for like conspiracy theorists, and more that's a growing and growing camp of logical thinkers are being called conspiracy theorists.
Right.
And that's kind of like implicitly that's what they're trying to put on you, is like this image of someone who doesn't know how to deal with the information in their environment, and they get completely and totally captured and absorbed in it, and it is negative in their life. You know, how often are conspiracy theories positive in someone's life, like a positive development? I mean, you know, maybe if they start a podcast, they become the major speaker on that one subject or something. But for the most
unless you're
part,
Alex Jones, maybe it's probably not that beneficial, you know, to have yourself wrapped up in it.
Yeah, but he's paid a price as well. It seems like
true.
Over the years digging into that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's about the fruit, and that's the stuff you can't fake.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I 100% agree. Well, I mean, what is your rabbit hole story? I mean, how did all this, you know, get kicked off for you?
Yeah, so yeah, there's probably so many different ways I can start from, but you know, really in hindsight, how I see how I've lived most of my life, I've lived like so high time preference, like probably the highest time preference that's like viable for you know, making it to my age. Like I was so term oriented my whole life. I hated school. I was only interested in what I was interested in. You know, I was a terrible procrastinator. I couldn't get myself to brush my teeth for years. Like I tried as a teenager, even like I couldn't get it. It would give me anxiety, but I still couldn't do it. And that's kind of like how I felt about myself in a lot of ways throughout my life. And the path I went down was kind of more of a creative and a music path. So since I was 15, I think I started playing in local bands in Oklahoma City, mainly metal bands, and then eventually kind of hardcore and punk bands. And so that was the only path for me in the world that I saw. It was one of the only things I cared about. And, you know, I didn't think about the future really. I was just like this, or it's nothing, or my life is in the trash. And so that kind of lined me up for being in a certain culture that is very, you know, very progressive, but really that progression becomes more and more the opposite, I guess. And I definitely saw that as I got older. But what really first what really first planted the seed for me to start thinking about money was actually watching the Zeitgeist documentaries, if you ever seen those. And I know we all love Peter Joseph and the Bitcoin scene, but nonetheless, like I owe a lot to him for those documentaries, and not that I agree with everything that's in them, but specifically the second movie he has, Zeitgeist Addendum, the whole opening sequence, like I really suggest watching it if you haven't. It's like a 10-20 minute opening sequence. He basically breaks down where money comes from and like the process of the creation of money. And he tries to break it down in very simple language, which is nice. But even at the time, I understood so little about economics that I didn't really grasp on too much, except for the fact that every dollar that's created is created with a debt greater than $1. And that simple idea just got like planted in my mind. And at the time when I saw that, I was, I think, 17 or 18, and I was and I had already dropped out of school at that point. I was like a terrible student. I was homeschooled until I was 14, I think. And then I got thrown in the public school system. I went to public school for probably 2 years, and then I started skipping school, ended up dropping out as a sophomore. And, so everything educational and academic, I was like, yeah, I'm leaving that behind. That door's closed. And so let's see, I'm 17, 18, I'm out of school, and I'm very deranged about the world. I see like the wealth inequality, and for me, it feels like theft. And this is why I relate so much to how people on the other side of the aisle see things, because that is how my mind developed. Those are the ideas that really like my mind grew in the way that I saw the world. And so yeah, I'm really deranged about things. And then I watch this documentary, and then I kind of get this idea in my head that the whole global economy is going to crash. Like if we're creating more than $1 debt for every dollar we create, like you can only do that for so long. Like I knew that. Such a simple idea. So it was like we're continually adding fragility into this. At the same time, the world is getting worse, or it's how it seemed from my perspective. More wealth is getting into fewer hands, and more people are suffering. And really, that's actually kind of a short-term viewpoint right there. But that's how I saw things. And so yeah, what do you do when you get those ideas, but you're completely powerless? What can you do? Like, you're kind of just like, okay, well, everything's fucked, and I'm just going to move on and like focus on myself. And so that's what I did. But that thought never left me. It was always like kind of deep inside of me. And I kind of had like almost a little bit of pride that's like the kind of dumb pride that someone who's just a critic has, where I was just a critic of everything, especially when it came to the economy.
Right.
And I love to talk about how it's all bullshit and it was all rigged. So very much that person sounds like someone who's a little bit set up for Bitcoin. And, but I definitely wasn't set up to go into software. But yeah, I mean, someone who's been extremely important on my journey has been Jordan Peterson. And I know for you, that's definitely true, and so many others in the Bitcoin space. And like I was not ready to hear what he had to say at first by any means. But once my mind was in a place where I was ready to start looking at other ideas, I found him, and it kind of clarified everything for me in the life that I was living. And really the important thing that I really got from him was about nihilism, and kind of about that. I saw nihilism as a way that you choose to see the world and live your life. But Peterson, he very much frames it as nihilism is the outcome of when you are unwilling to take responsibility for what's in your life. It's the natural ending place. It's the natural outcome. That really stuck with me. because I saw my life going down that road and tons of other people I knew. And yeah, like my family, like I've had kind of a rough family history a little bit, lots of addiction in my family. My father was addicted to like amphetamines, starting with a terrible corporate job, back pain, hating his life, starting to take pills, and it all goes down from there. And so I watched that happen when I was a teenager, that slow descent. And the same thing happened with both my older brothers, and they've both been struggling with addiction for over a decade. And so with my family and just the tons of other people in my world that were involved in the hardcore and the punk scene and all sorts of abused and broken people that are kind of coming together in a community and connecting and getting this energy out. And, you know, it's a very positive thing. But I saw this as being true. I saw that most people end up down this path, and few people actually make it. And by make it, I mean, they don't build their own personal hell. And that's enough of, you know, not making it to really want to make it. So yeah, a lot of things there, but that was kind of like all of these things building up in the background. And, you know, the most important switch that happened in my head to where I was open to first hearing about Bitcoin was I basically decided that I wanted to be happy, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you know, I never would have said that I don't want to be happy or that I don't deserve to be happy, or I would have never said the opposite out loud, but I realized that that belief was in me implicitly, and that it had built up from all of this kind of derangement and this way of seeing humans as a plague, as a problem, as broken from the start and tainted by sin completely. And so yeah, like I decided, you know, I want to be happy, and that's okay. And when I thought about that more, when I dug into that thought, I realized like I want to be wealthy, and that's okay. And that was really the hardest one, because that's saying that like I you know, like I am willing to step up to responsibility and then take the rewards, the potential rewards for that, and then handle it with, you know, with responsibility, with care, and make it a positive sum thing in the end. I guess that's really the difference, is like I saw wealth as this wholly negative sum. And I switch that tune to realizing that it's actually positive sum. And that since it's positive sum, it's actually almost a moral duty for me to go do as much as I can. And so kind of those all didn't happen at once. They happened across time, but you know, I was just starting from zero, and I took Jordan Peterson's simple advice of like, write out your personal hell and then write out your personal heaven. And I did that, and I never thought about that before. And when I wrote out what my most ideal, perfect future would be, it was essentially I'm free, I have free time, I'm making things of value to others, I have enough wealth to be okay, and I'm connected in community with people I love, and I'm connected with God, whoever God is, whatever that deepest truth is. And I realized like this is what I really want in my heart of hearts, and this is actually a good thing. And that was very groundbreaking. With that perspective, when I heard about Bitcoin for the first time, I was just so open. My mind was open. I was listening for anything, any kind of an opportunity. What can I do? What can I be a part of? And I literally overheard someone talking about Bitcoin at my job at the time at Panera Bread, saying like their brother was mining. I didn't really know what that meant at all, but it sounded like an opportunity. And so I got home that day and I searched it on YouTube, and I started to learn, and I never stopped.
That's fucking awesome, dude. And like so much of that story, you know, resonates with me a lot. And I think a lot of other people, because, you know, one of the things that resonates is like, I used to feel Well, kind of like you recognize everything's fucked, right? Like whether it's, you watch a movie like Zeitgeist and that just plants a seed, and then you end up like investigating further into all these things, and you come to a pretty strong conclusion, like, oh, the world is fucked, and most people are retarded, and everything's wrong, and everyone's asleep, and all that kind of stuff. But then, like, unless you're, and like for me, it was the case that I didn't see how that could be turned around. So, the terminology I often use is the very same one that you use. It's like, well, I'm just gonna, try to muddle through and get mine, and not have much of a broader purpose. But there was always an element of me that, like, even if I didn't always consciously recognize or appreciate it, that was like, no, this isn't it. Like there's something grander or greater or more truthful or more coherent or congruent with the better parts of you that is available. And even though it seems like you can't see it anywhere right now, like, keep the faith, basically.
Mhm.
And so don't let go entirely, right? Don't go to full nihilism or full sleep mode, or full, like, I don't care, or full egotism. Like, keep the faith. There's something good on the horizon, and that's tough. And I think a lot of people, the world and the different roles that they're forced to conform to, just, beat them into the shapes of those forms, and they kind of let go of any notion that it could be different. And so, like, when they're in their job, maybe they're like, they hear someone talking about whatever, Bitcoin or spirituality or whatever it might be, that could be an avenue to enhance the clarity or the meaning in one's life. They're not even paying attention because they've already kind of given up. But I feel like a lot of us in Bitcoin, like, those attention feelers were still alive to some degree, right? And they were waiting, they were trying to, like, sense something, wait to come across something. And then, thankfully, somehow you get exposure to Bitcoin, and because you still give a fuck that there might be something more, you don't let it go so easily. You dig into it, you learn about it a little bit more. And if you can just do that, it seems like, well, Bitcoin is an endless rabbit hole, right? And there's so much to learn, and it's related to so many different things that starts to generate an avenue of greater meaning. And, so I guess there's a bunch of elements of your story that I'd love to ask you about. But
Yeah.
I think one of the critical components of Bitcoin that helps people reorient their lives is that it becomes a mechanism by which they can see the world could be vastly different than their prior conception of it. And so in this case, it's, I look at the world, I learn about the world, the money system, the big business, government, all that kind of stuff, military industrial complex, it looks totally fucked. And so that's not a very inspirational thing on the horizon to call you forth and bring, extract your potential, et cetera. But once you start to see that this little mechanism, if you can change this thing, then what could lay on the horizon could be far more compatible with what you would think to be right and good and beautiful and all those other superlatives. So when was it that, and so I think that's largely responsible for the transformations we referred to when we started, is that, like, you begin to see a far more bright or hopeful future on the horizon. And of course, that's more inspiring to get you to transform or conform yourself in various ways to meet that, or to avail of the opportunity that represents. So when was it that that kind of clicked for you, that what was, when you conceived of the future, it went from being, this big dark mess that couldn't get rectified to something different?
Yeah, and it's really that immediate incentive that Bitcoin gives you, which is number go up, but that it wasn't a short-term thing for me because I didn't have leverage in the short term, right? Whatever I did, it had to be a long-term plan. And I knew that because I was starting with almost nothing. And so, finding Bitcoin, and you realize some of the first things you learn about it, proof of work. The first time I saw that phrase, proof of work, it was like fascinating to me. And when I learned about it, because I was like, wow, we're taking in energy on a network and like verifying it like all across the world and putting it into this scarce digital asset, like so weird, just like so outside of the bounds of anything you've ever thought about. But and so, yeah, like the fact that it was scarce, it's just like the simple idea of, well, it's obvious when you learn about Bitcoin, people are talking about how they're trying to grow it, how they're trying to get people to adopt it, how they adopted it. And it's just implicit that, okay, well, as more people adopt it, it's going to go up in price, like very simply. And since it's this type of asset that people want to hold for the long term, they don't want to sell. And there's actually all these memes about how they don't want to sell and how they're not going to sell. Like, that was kind of the spark for me where it's like, wow, like I could have a wealthy future here just by being early and like saving really smart. And so that was kind of just my personal incentive to draw me in. But it was really listening to Andreas Antonopoulos and some of his early videos back in the day that really like spoke to me on a new level and got me diving in a whole lot deeper. And I just loved how Andreas focused on the unbanked and those who struggle because of our monetary paradigm. And I'd never thought about those people, or I had thought about those people, but I'd never thought about what the ailments they really were suffering. I just would imagine, all of the people in Africa and India that are starving, that don't have access to what I have access to. And I would feel equal parts guilty and like mad at my country and mad at the world and mad at the sky, but like seeing that framing from Andreas, I realized that like this is a solution for these people. And I started thinking about that person, that hypothetical person that has nothing and is trapped in the third world. And with Bitcoin, I saw that like if I'm that person, I have access to the global markets. I can just step out of my situation if I have the merit to do so, or if I can provide value enough to do so. And you hear about these stories of like the women escaping, I think Iran or something, like earning Bitcoin. It's like very long ago, but I heard these stories and this reconciled kind of my new developed mindset with my values that have been there the whole time. And I realized that actually the truer embodiment of my values was kind of the opposite of what I was leaning into before and what I saw before, what I wanted to happen before. I was very into like democratic socialism and stuff like that and UBI. And I realized I was like, I care about the same things. I still have these values. They're within me, but they're better manifested through Bitcoin. And that really completed the picture for me, because that's my incentive. And then that's my meaning and that's my calling. And that kept me going with kind of a whole new level of seriousness than I had before.
Very well said. Before we extend on that to kind of up till now, but you mentioned that a number of your family members had struggled with substance abuse and, the related psychological, components of that or whatever. What do you think it is about you or your mindset that allowed you to not fall into the same situation?
I actually think it's luck. I don't think I have any merit for not ending up there. And I have the most empathy for my brothers for that reason, because I'm the youngest. So I watched my father and then I watched them go through that journey. And I knew that was just a clear signal for me to do the opposite. And so I stayed away from drugs for a very, very long time, like all throughout my teen years. And I kind of like looked down on people who smoked weed or anything like that. I didn't realize at the time it was just kind of my own internal pain that I needed to work through, that was just coming out in that kind of way. But the more I look back and the more that I grow, the more that I just feel like, I just got lucky. There's no reason why that wouldn't have been me.
You mentioned how, and it's so interesting to the way you put it in terms of how like you had these sort of, broadly speaking, compassionate heart. You wanted other people to be doing well and to suffer less hardship. And I guess the philosophies that prevailed or that were available in the culture were always these, again, to batch everything together, these like left-leaning ideologies. And that's how you fix the inequities of the world. And that you came to seeing that, in fact, it was almost the opposite, but the values and the potential represented in Bitcoin were actually the best ways to rectify these issues. And of course, I'm sure that stimulated a lot of additional nuance into how these issues are generated in the first place and why they come about and why people are in this situation. But I mean, at that time, when that kind of clicked for you, we talked about alienation at the beginning. Like, was that a difficult, because I presume you had at least some of a peer group that thought in the same way that you did. And like, how did that dynamic play out?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty terrified. I was afraid of what I was watching and listening to, as far as I was afraid of people would find out. Like, I remember feeling paranoid about my YouTube history, like of all the Jordan Peterson videos I was watching, or all the lectures or anything. And really, I didn't have my mind wasn't made up at that point. I was just like, I'm going to try and grab all of the best ideas from the happiest, most successful seeming people that I can, and just work through them. And that was kind of happening alongside with me discovering Bitcoin. But yeah, I mean, I was, like at the bleeding edge of that progression, where, the people, a lot of the people I was around, like they would see, if you're a conservative or have any conservative ideals, like you'd be seen basically as a racist, or, someone less than moral just by default. And so to even start to look into these ideas and play around with them was dangerous. And I felt that danger immediately. And I felt that resistance. Luckily, my closest group of friends and like the band that I've been in for a really long time, called The Tooth, they're amazing people. And they have like always kind of been along with me. And it took a while for me to kind of start to open up and share with them how I was changing in this new direction I wanted to go and all of that. But, still you're in an opposite world at that point. And really the hardest thing out of all of that was my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And she was just bought into that world all the same as I was. And so now I'm going on this just like cosmic hero's journey completely alone. And then I'm supposed to just like go back to her and like act normal and act like I'm not having my foundation shaken. And
Right.
and it was hard. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen here, because I'm pursuing truth and I'm not going to stop that. But like, I don't know if she'll come along the ride with me. And I mean, one of the most amazing things that's happened in the fruit, just seeing the fruit itself from Bitcoin, is seeing her go down that journey years after me. And she did, and she's a full on Bitcoiner now. She holds her own keys. And she actually wrote an article about her journey in Citadel 21. It's called How a Lefty Became a Maxi. And she's an amazing writer. So she has better words than I do, but a lot of her journey mirrors mine, and kind of encountering these beliefs and having the rug pulled out from under them, which is what Bitcoin does. And so, yeah, that was one of the hardest parts of it. And it was also hard because it's like, I don't know anyone in my whole world that, for one, is interested in this, but for two, has even really done anything with technology. Or I hardly knew anyone that had left Oklahoma. That was just like, so this was so far outside of my world, just the isolation is crushing at times. But something has to be good enough. There has to be enough breadcrumbs on the trail to really keep you going down a path with so much resistance. And that's exactly, what Bitcoin did for me.
That's awesome. What do you think it is? Like, do you have any special insights about that cohort or demographic of people, referring to the people whom you were a bit afraid of them finding out that this change was occurring in you? Again, broad brushstrokes, but like people on the far left, let's say. What do you think? I mean, have you, based on your experiences, yours, your wife's, your friends, what was the turning point that allowed them to be open to and inevitably shift their perspective or way of thinking from that to, for lack of a better term, or perhaps there is no better term than a Bitcoiner perspective?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of my friends, it's been just more of a compromise. They understand why I'm into it, and you know, they don't judge me for what I'm into. They're stoked on it. So that's all fine and good, but they're not really going down the rabbit hole themselves as much as I, you know, try and check in every few months and have that conversation. But yeah, you're asking like what is the insights I have for like those people and getting on that path.
Yeah, I mean, because it happened to you and your wife and some of your friends, but like, you know, because the reason why I'm asking is because so many people obviously are in that category today. And I think we would both agree that that's not a healthy perspective to have if one is trying to build the most successful, healthy life for themselves, their family, their community, et cetera. You know, that's, there's an assumption wrapped up in that. And I'm sure many people would debate that. But for the sake of us being on, or because we're both on the same page, I think in terms of Bitcoin and the benefits it represents in terms of one's changing one's perspective, like, what do you think is the blockage? Why they might not be able to change their perspective?
Yeah. So I actually really do think that the blockage is simply the difficulty to dive in deep enough to have their presuppositions question or to question them. Because I believe that, at least from the perspective I had, Bitcoin checked all of those boxes for the values, for what I wanted to happen in the world and what I wanted to happen to myself and other people. It took a long time to realize that, though. It's not obvious on the surface level, but I realize, you know, all these things. I'm a sensitive person. I think that a lot of people who are on the creative side of things, they're more disorderly. They're more sensitive, and that's where a lot of people on the left find themselves. And so like I had that heart, and Bitcoin showed me that, like, you know, it's a more effective way of reaching out with care and compassion into the world in a way that you can never really have that impact on your own. And there's kind of a collectivized aspect to it as well, which I'm much more bearish on the collective, but the collective is necessary. And I was very bullish on the collective at that time. And so, you know, I saw Bitcoin. It's this democratic collective. It's spreading. It's bringing positive things to the world, taking power away from the powerless. You know, and sorry, power away from the powerful, giving it to the powerless. And it's like, is that not what we want? You know, is that not exactly what we want? And when you really start to think about money, you're like, well, how many things does money touch? You know, like everything. So you can't really analyze from that perspective. You pull it back down, and you kind of realize money touches like 50% of everything. And so you're like, well, you know, be kind of foolish to think this has no impact whatsoever on all of those things that come further down the line. And I started to realize that money actually comes before even the nation itself. It comes before a lot of things. And you track that journey of money back, and you end up in the tribe somewhere. And you realize that, oh, wow, we're dealing with something much more fundamental, a fact of who we are. And since Bitcoin is like dealing with that fact, accepting it, embracing that fact of the value that emerges from the individuals, the fact that we all have our own sense of value in what we see, and that we need to collaborate and communicate that value over to each other in order to essentially specialize and make things more productive. You build up from there, and you're like, okay, this is how we got here. If we're drifting from this truth and trying to do a totally different paradigm after the fact, like, we're going to have worse results. So it was really just a Lindy type of thing that spoke to me there. So I mean, I'm kind of ranting a lot, but it really just comes down to the fact that like those values that you have, those things that you want to see in the world, like Bitcoin is actually addresses them in a way that you can't really imagine until you dive pretty damn deep,
Right.
and you won't
Yeah.
come out the same.
Yeah. No, I well said again, and I agree. And it's with the people in that collectivist mindset. I mean, so often it seems like their heart is in the right place, but to me, it seems like two things get in the way. One is their ego. I think they have a bit of a savior complex. They think that the solutions that they have devised are the best, and therefore they should be imposed or accepted by others. And I think there's a fundamental flaw in that reasoning. But the other one is that it seems like the mechanism by which they want to impose, or to put it a little bit softer, like roll out their solutions on the world, is the very same mechanism that they claim to be against, which is one of complete control, and as a result the ability to do that. That they miss the emergent ground up order that can be derived when things are predicated on the proper principles and values. And they just think it's a top down sort of solution to things. And I think that's where they get in trouble, and why the outcomes of when they do get their way are not nearly as rosy as they anticipate or espouse when they're first attempting to gain the influence in order to roll them out or to implement them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I love and the framing of top down versus bottom up. And this has been something that's just so clarifying for me. And just you chunk it down to that concept and you look at the world through that filter, and it's just you see so much truth doing that. And what I didn't understand at the time, and I think most people don't understand about some of these ideologies, specifically communism, socialism, stuff like that, it's like you imagine it's like the workers were rising up as a collective, it's bottom up, but it's like, no, this is top down. This is actually the most ferocious kind of top down order and ruling and enforcement by violence, or the threat of violence. And like, are you going to defend that? Like, how can you really defend that, when you have this whole community way of seeing the world, bottom up way of seeing the world, which I think they do have this bottom up way of seeing the world. A lot of them, or at least a lot of the more radical people that I was interacting with. And so, yeah, to really learn about that stuff, they don't teach us that stuff. They don't teach us about communism. They don't teach us about socialism. We learn about Hitler. We learn about what happened to the Jews, the concentration camps. We learn about that a lot. But what happened in Russia is so important, and it's insane to me. I'm just really learning about these things over the last 2 to 3 years, digging into Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago. And what I see there is truly the most hellish thing I can imagine, and absolutely a reason, an incentive to push the world in this direction where the individuals are empowered more than ever and are sovereign more than ever. And so like I see that as this what's at stake here. Like we need to invest in the individual, because the other direction is the top down onto the collective. And so yeah, I'm really deranged about that specific topic, because I just can't believe what happened. There's a cannibal island. Like you never heard about that, in school. Like that seems bad enough, that seems important enough. Or the gulags of tens of millions of people going through them, and most of them dying just by how they are treated there. Like that's been just so impactful for me to read about that, and it's had me kind of dig deeper into these kind of foundational, almost Austrian economic ideals that we see at the root of Bitcoin and what it's tapping into. For one, like a value coming from the individual, but like the key line from that book is Solzhenitsyn says is that the line between good and evil crosses through the heart of every man. And like, I love that line. It's so perfect because you see that, because you realize like I could be that person. I could be that complete nihilistic mess who not only throws my life in the gutter, but pulls others down with me. And then what's on the opposite of that? And that's something that Peterson says about like networks. He gives the analogy of networks. Like you're not just one person, you're one person connected to five people, connected to five people, you know, you're squaring it. So like what you do has an outsized network effect on all of the people around you. And that actually flips it to where it's like it's your responsibility to deal with that reality and make the most of it and do the best for yourself, and then, you know, making your own bed, and then for the in turn for the people all around you. And so a lot of things on that, but it's just like those truths are self-evident, and we as a culture, as a world, we need to rediscover those truths, and I hope we don't have to do it the hard way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And, you know, on the one hand, people falling into making those same mistakes over and over can be somewhat forgiven because, as you mentioned, it's so sparsely covered in our education. You know, like where in our education do you learn about the history of money and the consequences of different forms of money and how money has been corrupted through the ages? I mean, it's just not there, right? You just learn about supply and demand economics, and your currency is the US dollar, the Canadian dollar, the Aussie dollar, the euro, whatever. And it's not given a second notice when, you know, I think we could make a strong case that that's the primary mechanism that allows these catastrophes to unfold, because of the power granted to those who can control that mechanism. And so even if our future doesn't have more education on these subjects in them, although I'm almost certain they will, because if we're moving into a Bitcoin denominated or hyper Bitcoinized future, then there's going to be value placed on understanding the mistakes we made in the past and how to avoid making them again in the future. But I think it's also an incredible boon, which is why so many of us are excited about Bitcoin, that now we have a form of property that cannot be violated. So even if you didn't learn the mistakes of history, we're now in such a different paradigm that you needn't necessarily understand the pitfalls of you know, allowing your money to be co-opted if by default you've established an inviolable property relationship with your money as a result of it being the de facto money or currency in the system or in the world. And so that's tremendously hopeful for, you know, avoiding some of those mistakes of the past. But as we all know, we're not out of the woods yet, and there's still much to be determined.
Yeah.
What, you know, bring me back up to this process you're going through, and you came to understand Bitcoin and start reframing, you know, your perception of the world and your image of yourself in the future and what you wanted to achieve. I mean, where is that today? Because I think, again, we all know that it doesn't stop, right? These like sort of epiphanies and insights and the way they impact you and reorient you. I mean, maybe it even accelerates, you know, that seems to be the case for me. Like, it's just a constant, seemingly a constant stream of these insights that they just, you know, modify your perspective here and here and there. And then it changes your behavior. And then based off the back of changed behavior, your circumstances changes, and it just, you know, keeps rolling. So bring me up to today in this journey that we've been exploring.
Yeah. Everything is on the up and up. Like that's, as I've leaned in more, it's not that everything has been ideal, but I've gotten better. I've felt better. I've done more things and better things, and just generally had more capability to, you know, for one, be a person that can just take care of myself, which in a lot of ways I'm still learning that. Like I'm still making up for a lot of these traits that I accumulated throughout my, you know, childhood and young adulthood. And it's hard, and, you know, I see it in the truth that it is now, and there's still a ton of growth. Like I'm still so early in the way that I see it, but from where I've come from, I feel like a completely different person. So, you know, there's no ceiling, right? But it's also like when you have a starting point, that's the motivator right there. When you have a starting point, and maybe when you have some kind of goal that you want to reach, and, you know, that's kind of how I framed things. Like once I knew I wanted to get fully into Bitcoin and whatever way that meant, I knew like, okay, I have this future value in mind. I have this place I'm coming from, you know, like I want to be the person that lifted myself out of the situation. Like I want to be that person so bad. And I just started to build up that identity. And so I spent a year and a half probably just learning more about Bitcoin and exploring everything that I could possibly do in it. And I went down a lot of bad paths doing that, like shit coins, because when I got into Bitcoin, it was right as we were approaching 10,000 for the first time. And so, that was the peak of the hype and the mania. And, I heard about Ethereum and the world computer, sounded so cool. And it was naturally attractive to me. And actually, this is something I kind of want to touch on later about why this other side of cryptocurrency is so attractive to most developers, most junior developers, or people entering the space versus Bitcoin. But I mean, luckily, when I learned about these things, I already had a pretty solid foundation with Bitcoin, from an incentive level, like I believed in the long term, and then from a value level. And so, I wasn't going to be shaken. I wasn't going to have my sats shaken off of me. But nonetheless, I tried to trade. I tried to, do long-term investing in it or whatever, there's no such thing in shitcoin markets as long-term investing. It's only getting rug pulled. But, like I tried to do that because I thought, this is what I see a lot of people in the Bitcoin and the crypto space doing. You don't really, as soon as you type in Bitcoin and start typing in that stuff in the internet, you just get this complete shit coming at you, mostly influencers and YouTubers and traders and all of that. So, I was on Twitter, always lurking, and I just over time just parsed through those people, parsed through them until you find those really high signal people that speak to you in a different way. And like, obviously Andreas was one of those people for me, but also I think Gigi was one of the first like real hardcore Bitcoin maximalists I followed on Twitter. And I loved the way that he saw things and talked about things. I was like, I admire that. And I don't admire this, actually, if I think about it. But you have that attractive, whatever, trading vision and what you can do in the future. And I thought that would be my high agency way of kind of getting ahead. And so, had to get a little bit wrecked for that to learn my lesson. And I did. But since I was, I had that foundation of Bitcoin, like it didn't scare me away. I still had nearly all of my Bitcoin and was planning on holding it. And so I was like, okay, what else can I do? I thought about writing, recording podcasts. I thought about just doing everything. Like, what can I possibly do to get involved with Bitcoin? And just more and more, like this idea of like software, it's like, hey, this is the software. There's an obvious thing that you can do here. But I didn't even want to think about that because that just seemed so hard. But once I kind of exhausted most of my other options, I was left thinking just like, okay, I'm so inspired by this. I love to learn about the way it works. I want to help its growth. Like, I think I need to start considering, trying to become a developer. And that was probably in mid 2018, something like that, when I started on that. And so, yeah, I mean, from there, I just went on like the most rough and tumble, unoptimal journey to where I am today.
You wanted, just to clarify, you wanted to learn like software engineering by itself, or you wanted to actually learn how to like be a developer on Bitcoin?
Well, originally be a developer on Bitcoin, because I was like, well, that's what I want to work on. So I'm going to go be a developer on Bitcoin. And you start to look into the resources and look at what's out there. And I realized like, whoa, this is a bit out of my depth. I had no idea really how out of my depth it was. I couldn't have even imagined at the time. And so really, I just started learning some basic programming with Python, took Udemy courses online, stuff like that. Struggled, failed, gave up, hated myself so much that I went back to it 2 weeks later, tried again, kind of went through that journey for a little while on my own. And every time I kind of went back to Bitcoin to like see, is there anything I can understand here, anything I can contribute to, it was just like so much every time. And I didn't see a way to approach Bitcoin. It seemed like there was just this big wall around it. And so kept on trying to learn on my own. And at one point, and throughout this process, this is important, is my job at the time. I was a delivery driver, Jimmy John's, for 6 years. And so I would 5-6 days a week, I would just be in my car driving, delivering sandwiches all day. And I would just listen to podcasts and lectures. And I was learning about, fundamentals of computer science. And I was learning about Bitcoin. And I was learning about economics and history and all of these things. Like really my whole education has come after Bitcoin and come through the framing of Bitcoin. And it made it exciting and clarifying to do that. So I
It's a
was just
fucking
learning all this.
great job to have, just to plug yourself into the matrix of learning about all this stuff every day.
It was amazing. And I really started to realize that too. It's like, wow, I am in an incredible position right here because I'm young and I've got all of this time and I'm learning all of this stuff that's so important and high leverage. I really felt it at the time. And at the same time, I was stacking sats with my meager salary with my tips. I would, set aside $10 every day of my tips, and I'd buy Bitcoin with it, and would just do that just religiously. And to this day, like still most of my Bitcoin is accumulated under that meager salary. And so yeah, like it was a huge opportunity, and it was a job that I got just because I didn't want to do anything because I wanted to do as little as possible. But once you're ready to do something, that's actually an advantage because it's like I've got all of this time. And I would deliver to all of these people in these offices, these business people, and just like the contrast of what I was going through and what I was seeing in these just like dead offices with these people that hated themselves. Like I really saw that most people hate themselves and have built their own hell and they haven't made it. And that is absolutely terrifying. And no one ever told me that. Like I kind of realized that by interacting with the world. And maybe that's a bit of a hyperbolic view, but that's really stuck with me. And so, yeah, that with that kind of education foundations coming into place, I, started to get more serious and considered college. And that would be the next kind of difficult phase of my journey. But yeah, I was starting to think about college. I was thinking if I'm going to work on Bitcoin, I need to understand computer science from its like foundations. I need to understand it in a fundamental way. And so, it seemed like the option. But there was a lot of stuff to do before getting there. So I really started to build this internal identity for myself. And this whole time I was really starting to build this ideal identity of my future self in this state where I've made it to being a software engineer and where, I'm changed by Bitcoin and I'm more capable and all of these things. And this image, it just built up more and more and more. And I just became obsessed with it. And so I was like, I have to do this. I have to be the person that makes this journey. So, so the first thing to do was get my high school diploma. So I was 23 at the time, and I started studying in my free time, and I had to start from middle school math. Like I was trying to think of like, what is the last math I like remember and I know how to do? And it was long division. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to long division. I'm going to start there and I'm going to work up to college. And so that was really freaking hard. My wife who had gone to college and was like great at academics, she helped me a lot, but it was extremely difficult. It took 4 months just to get my high school diploma. And when I got, that's one of the things I'm most proud of, because that was the moment. It was like, okay, I've done something tangible that I would have never done before. And like, now I have to keep on going. And so I enrolled in Oklahoma City Community College. I was still working and going there. And I had an amazing first programming course with an amazing professor who had an impact on me. And he was kind of too good to be teaching that course, actually. But this was really cool for me. I'd never talked to anyone else who programmed. I didn't really know anyone else who programmed. So to be in a class full of people, like, it was so invigorating. And about halfway through that class, I look ahead at my curriculum in college and I start looking at the technologies and the classes I'm taking. And I realize like, this is looking like a waste of time. This is looking like it's not going to work out. There's kind of a trope or a cliche of the CS grad, the computer science graduate who doesn't know how to code. And I didn't want to be that. And I could see myself easily like being good at academia, because this was the new skill I was trying to learn, being good at homework, being good at checking boxes. And I could easily see that like I could go down this path and be good at that, but I might be missing these fundamental skills I'm really trying to make. So I asked my professor about these classes and what he thought about them and what I wanted to do. And he was kind of like, yeah, I mean, these classes probably won't help you do that. And honestly, you can probably learn this on your own if you have good teachers and if you do projects and stuff like that. And it was really amazing that he told me that, because I knew at that point I needed to take a different direction. And so that was after like a semester and a half, and I didn't know what I was going to do at all. And I felt really bad, but my mind was open once again. I was searching, looking for any opportunity. And I found a boot camp called Lambda School, which lets you, it's in a longer intensive program that's about a year long, and they let you take it up front without paying anything, entering what's called basically an income share agreement, which is where if you graduate and you get a job making at least 50K a year, then you have to start paying back your loan. Otherwise, you do not. So this was a huge opportunity. I didn't have any money. I was already in debt from college. So I saw this, I looked into it. As soon as I saw it was like the real deal, I was just right after it, and applied and emailed them again and again, just like wanting them to pick me so bad. And as soon as I got accepted, I dropped out of college. So then I was a high school and a college dropout from that point. I was kind of like, okay, didn't expect to end up here. But it was absolutely the right decision, because I would be in my second year of college or something now. And now instead I'm just finished my first year at my first software job. So yeah, I'll stop there.
So you did the year at the Lambda boot camp thing, right?
Yep.
And you came out of that and put some resumes around and you got a job. Is that what happened?
Yeah, basically, it was a little bit different because Lambda School was a great option for me, but what they were teaching was web development, and I'd never really thought about web development, and I didn't think it applied too much to Bitcoin, but I felt that I had no options, and I was like, okay, if I can learn this sector of software, then I can jump over to Bitcoin eventually. And so that was kind of my plan. So I went to Lambda. Really, I struggled through in a lot of ways. I wasn't the most excellent student, but I ended up getting chosen or asked if I wanted to work for the school as what's called a team lead, which is basically, kind of a small group lead that helps you go through the curriculum and helps you with your problems. And because I was consistent, I showed up, I talked to everyone. They thought I was a great person, so they chose me, and I did that. And that's where I really got to see other people kind of going through their software journeys and how they experience it and the things that they have to work through in order to make it. And this really started to just inform all of these ideas in my mind that have kind of built up to where I am today. But yeah, so I did that while I was finishing my student status. And then I actually got laid off before I finished. And so I got laid off and I had to go back to Jimmy John's full time. And so I was kind of finishing the last part of my journey while still working this subpart job and not motivating. And it took me like 7 months of applying and hundreds of applications to be able to get this position. But I did it, and it was a crazy long journey. And as soon as my second day on the job, I was instantly just like, I'm afraid of becoming nascent here. Like I need to keep on this journey. I need to remember what I'm doing this for, because in a lot of ways I've made the full journey now that everyone wants to make. And I'm working at this startup that, if you're in the fiat world, that this is a guaranteed way to wealth. It's a guaranteed way to become a millionaire. Get in a startup early and just do hard work and stay there and accumulate all the stock you can. But just right from the beginning, I was like, no, I have to keep on approaching Bitcoin and trying to be able to work with it in any way I can. And so I've built a number of projects that have kind of built up to me being able to even approach Bitcoin. And I'm now really, and it's why I've taken on the name Bitcoin Pleb Dev. I'm just I'm just now in these first stages of learning Bitcoin development at the fundamental level. I've been in the base 58 course that's hosted by Nifty and Stakamoto. It's kind of like a Bitcoin protocol course. And so been learning that along with doing other projects. And I'm starting to write now. I'm writing about my journey, and I'm trying to write for the other plebs that are trying to become devs or are on their path to become devs. And like that's where my heart has really grown, as far as like how I want to interact with people, and then just the fact that I want to see Bitcoin grow and us have a successful Bitcoin future that we're imagining. And so yeah, it's kind of a quick glide over that whole part, but there was a lot that happened in there for sure.
Yeah, man, that is so fucking awesome. Well done, man. Because I'm sure, you know, like when you tell stories like this, and you say like, yeah, that 6 or 7 month period was really tough, and then it led into this other thing. Like when you hear it in story form, it's just like, oh, it's, you know, one of those little dips in the story. But like when you're living it, and for 6 or 7 months of your life, like tough means not happy, stress in life, arguments, like, you know, concerns, anxiety, stresses of various kinds. Like to be able to persist through those things is no small accomplishment, you know. So, you know, I want to say great job on doing that and staying the course. And, you know, it's almost like low time preference for the win, right? Like your eye is on the long-term prize, and, you know, whatever slime or sludge you got to crawl through in order to get there, you seem to be committed to doing it, which is, you know, incredible. I love to hear it.
I mean, it's been weird, and I haven't been the greatest. You know, there's other people that take this journey and they do it twice as fast as me and then make twice the impact that I do in that period of time. Like I remember reading these blogs of like, you know, my zero to Bitcoin developer story, where, you know, someone is contributing to Bitcoin Core in a year and a half. And it was just like, that's not me, man. Like I identify with the left side of the bell curve, you know, like, and that's why I call myself pleb dev, is like, I'm not the greatest learner. I'm not really inclined for this, but like I'm passionate about it and I care. And I'm just trying to become a 1x dev. Like obviously Bitcoin, we need and we want 10x devs, but we also need thousands of 1x devs who are plebs who can help polish and maintain and help just fill out the gaps in this whole, you know, digital economy that we're trying to build, and this whole software landscape that we're trying to make possible for people. And so yeah, that's what pulls me forward, is like I want to get to 1x dev, you know, be able to make some kind of an impact, and I want to help others or collaborate with others, whatever, connect with others who are on that same journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I can't remember, you know, who to attribute the quote to, but it's something to the effect like, if you can find the why, you can bear almost anyhow, you know, something like that. And Bitcoin is obviously becoming an extremely powerful why for so many of us. And again, like I think this is when we conjure up these notions of a renaissance happening, right? And we look back at a prior quote unquote renaissance period, and we see the art, we see the architecture, and we see the culture, and you can begin to appreciate how that all that stuff came about, because all that stuff requires a tremendous amount of dedication and devotion and work and time and energy. But you can see how when, you know, when the object of your purpose or meaning is so powerful, that how it instills and inspires the actions required to bring about such things in the people that are involved in them. And I definitely see that happening with Bitcoin. Speaking of which, I mean, this is somewhat of a tangential or a related topic to that, you know, what I just said. And, you know, if you don't have anything naturally to say about it, of course, you don't have to, but you mentioned way back at the beginning when you first started on, you know, listening to Peterson and imagining the type of life that you wanted, and the different areas that like the different things you felt you had to integrate to get there. God was one of them. And you said, you know, however you define God or anything like that. And, you know, I've been talking a lot lately about the notion of God and the highest value and truth and meaning. And again, Bitcoin inspires these sorts of things because you dig down far enough and you kind of wind up in this territory. And I'm just wondering if you had anything, you know, noteworthy to say about that in terms of your journey that you've been on.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And really the only word, I've said this more and more lately, the only words I've had to tell people what I'm doing is that like I feel like God is laid out a path for me. And most recently, like since even before I got this job, I was feeling called towards Austin, Texas. And so I was looking for jobs in Austin, Texas. And I just felt that I needed to end up there. And as soon as I started my job and like my first week, I was telling them like, hey, you all have anything in Austin going on? Is there any people there? And they're like, yeah, there's a few employees, but we don't have an office. And I just like throughout the year just kept on talking about this, and manifested this idea. And now I'm just about to move there, and I'm so excited to connect with everyone there because what they're doing there is just truly amazing. But and yeah, I feel like I don't know what else it is that has put that on my heart and made me feel so pulled in that direction. Some kind of fundamental truth, or the most fundamental truth, which that's what God is. And so, yeah, like I've thought about this a lot more, and something really interesting that I've learned being here in Utah is, well, my wife has befriended some people who were from here and previously Mormon, and we've had lots of discussions with them about kind of the Mormon church and the culture they have here. It's a very interesting topic to like think about, and because you're kind of like really disgusted by a lot of things, but then you like see the merit in other things at the same time. It's quite strange, but something that really framed God and Christianity for me in a new light was I was talking to one of these people and I asked her, like, do you need the Mormon church? Do you need like the central body Mormon church to understand the doctrine and or know if you are saved? And she was like, yeah, you do. So I was like, you can't, it's not on your own. And this contrast immediately had me remembering all these things I learned about Christianity when I was younger that made me realize that it is something that is bottom up, because it says in the Bible something about how it's a sin to kind of judge or assume someone else's salvation or their relationship with God, whoever you are, right? So the implicit in that is that you as an individual, you have a direct connection to God, and it is your responsibility to maintain that connection to God. And so that's a very different paradigm, because if it's only the individuals from the bottom up, they have the connection to truth, then that means there is no other authority that can step between that has veto rights over that. And so that was a huge clarifying thing for me, where I saw that like, okay, there is some deep truth here that I'm digging into, and reading. I didn't read the whole book, but like parts of the book, Maps of Meaning, and you realize how the thesis of that book is basically that we perceive the world through value. It's a value first. We think we're intellectual, we think we're logical, we're not. It's all value and the meaning, the valence of things. And you kind of build up this evolutionary perspective of how and why Christianity and God emerged with that kind of truth. And where I am now is somewhere in between. Like I see like truth and mystery in God, and there's definitely something there. There's so much there, but at the same time, I also see how this reconciles my intellectual beliefs and evolution and all those things I learned about that felt very informative to me. Like I can see how these things are adaptive. Christianity is adaptive. It is a fit strategy. It is a very fit thing to do if you lean over your bed at night and you pray for courage for the next day. Do you think the person who does that is going to, have a better odds than the person who doesn't? It's like you start to put these things together and you see how and why this is crafted over time. And then the fact that it's the core protocol, or really just the core doctrine of Christianity, of Christ dying for our sins and the resurrection, like those haven't been messed with. That core protocol hasn't been messed with. The religion is forked off in many different, like directions over that surface level stuff, but the core protocol has been the same. And I think one of the most important parts is the individual's responsibility and access to God or to truth.
Yeah, I think so much of this is incredibly well put. And yeah, I mean, I agree with much of that. And I think, what I often say when I break into these topics, either on my podcast or some others that I've been on lately, is, for a lot of people, these have been just, or in our modern culture, let's say, and we adapt so much of our culture de facto, they've been dismissed far too early and with far too much arrogance and hubris. Just to think like that you can dismiss 5,000 years of deep thought and observation and all of these things by saying like, what a silly story. Like, who's going to believe that? I mean, it's and Maps of Meaning is a great book for helping to see through the veil of a literal interpretation of so many of these things and see why it is that value and meaning is so fundamental, perhaps the most fundamental. And it's not just that people are using these stories to delude themselves, it's they're cohering with a truth that actually, as you say, allows them to be more fit for the world. And you have to reconcile with yourself the question of, well, why is that? If it's simply a delusion, why is it why is it true? Why does it manifest benefits as a result of doing them? And I think one of the tricky aspects of wandering in these areas is that there's many different ways to be misled, and there's many ways to jump off the journey too soon and just accept a given truth, whatever it might be, even if it's self-derived. And I think my approach, and potentially what Bitcoin is inspiring in many others, is like, don't close the book, basically. Like, keep pursuing, because it may be the case that you will never know ultimate truth. It may be the case that you will never completely unify with the mind of God, or whatever terminology we want to use. But there's great benefit to continuing to pursue it and being on that journey and getting closer and closer and closer and closer, and then embodying that and representing that and acting that out in your life. And it seems to me, and I know like I'm self-selecting for this because it's such a keen interest of mine and I talk to people about it so much, but it seems to me that a lot of, in particular us Bitcoiners, are starting to think in those terms and think about those topics and issues and try to figure out how they should be integrated into our perspective.
Yeah, totally agree. And you made me think of like a quote I heard recently. I don't remember who from, but it's like a definition of faith. And that faith is like, well, it's for one, it's an action, it's an active thing, but this person framed it as like wrestling with God or wrestling with the truth. And I think really every Bitcoiner is on that journey, wrestling in the truth. And when you do that and you go deeper and deeper down, you get to these foundational axioms that
Get to the base
can
layer.
only be truth or God. Yeah. So you're like, okay, how do I wrestle with this? Like, how do I wrestle with gravity, with just the fundamentals of everything? And like, I don't know, but like I've never stopped being open and kind of just wrestling with those things, and got into, like different religious ideas at times, Eastern ideas and stuff like that. But yeah, just with Bitcoin, the impact it's had on my life, what I see in the world, like everything is pulling me back towards kind of the story of Christ and that framing of God, or at least the high signal that exists in that, whatever that means. Because maybe that's not the most fundamental piece, but nonetheless, that's what I find myself being more and more drawn towards.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of putting it, because our language and our cultural circumstances and all that kind of stuff, it seems to me, if we look at throughout history, become the wrapper for those most salient ideas or powerful notions or ideas or principles. And it may be the case that they shift and change over the time. It may be the case that the same principles and ideas can be wrapped in different wrappers. And so again, like, I think our task is to see the deepest truths that we possibly can. And then one, never stop trying to do that. And two, integrate what we find, because, and another kind of notion of faith is that maybe because you can never really know, and even though you could, you could look at your life and say, well, things work out way better if I do it this way. So that's kind of affirmative in that way. But even if you can never really know. I think an element of the faith is that pursuit is good, that you're pursuing or attempting at least to move towards something that is good, and to the extent that you can, and you can bring it in more into your life and into the world through you, then that is good as well.
Yeah, it's a tried and true pursuit. It's pragmatic, it's practical, it's optimal. You can see that in history, and it's like you don't have to buy into everything. Maybe you will over time, but that's just more and more of what I see is the merit in it.
Yeah. Austin, this has been fucking awesome to speak with you, man.
Likewise.
I've been loving every minute of it. Do you have anything else that you want to get off your chest before we shut it down? I mean, I'm sure we'll do another one of these at some point in the future. We'll have to, get another update in 6 to 12 months if you're up for it. But anything else you wanted to cover today?
Yeah, happy to do that. And my mind is loaded with all of these things I want to say about like the developer world and the developer ecosystem, but I think that would be best saved for another time. And I'm still walking my journey and learning as hard as I can. So, just want to say like thanks for having me on. And like any of the plebs, the pleb devs, anyone out there, like if you're on the journey, if you're thinking about starting the journey, like I'd love to just connect with you, talk to you, hear your story, all of that. But yeah, I mean, that's my piece.
Well, I'm sure you'll get some of that, but I hope the move to Austin goes well. I can only imagine how much of a level up things are going to be once you're there and you're mixing it up with Bitcoiners all the time. And there's so much going on. I'm excited for you because I know it's going to be a massive upgrade. So I hope that goes well.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's stay in touch and we'll talk again in the future.
Let's do it. Thanks a lot, John.
All right, brother. Take care.
You too.